Welcome to a brand new episode of Zeroing In, the Science Podcast. Moving further into the whole idea of unraveling the science behind building up a city, today we are in conversation with an expert from the field of agriculture and remote sensing, Professor Vinay Dadhwal, who has not only contributed immensely to the field, but has also played pivotal roles in shaping India's agricultural methods and techniques through remote sensing applications. Professor Dadhwal received his Bachelor's in Science degree in Botany from Hansraj College, New Delhi, and went on from there to the Indian Agricultural Research Institute for his Master's degree, where he continued and further received his PhD in Plant Physiology. After the completion of his PhD, Professor Dadhwal joined the Space Application Center, Ahmedabad, where he served as the head of Crop Inventory and Modeling Division. From there, he went on to serve as the Dean of Indian Institute of Remote Sensing, Dehradun. Professor Dadhwal joined the National Remote Sensing Center, NRSC, Hyderabad, as the Associate Director and went on to become the Director of NRSC. After this, he served as the Director of the Indian Institute of Space Science and Technology, Thiruvananthapuram. Currently, Professor Dadhwal is Chair Professor at the National Institute of Advanced Sciences, Bengaluru. Professor Dadhwal has made seminal contributions to the field of crop irrigation and management. His research work over the years have spanned from plant physiology to understanding and modeling the carbon cycle. Through his career, Professor Dadhwal has taken up multiple pivotal bureaucratic positions, contributing both in application domain and academia. Joining me as co-host in our conversation with Professor Dadhwal is Radha Krishna Kavaluru, who is currently a scientist SD at the National Remote Sensing Center, Hyderabad. Okay, perfect. So, again, thank you, sir, and let's just, go into the conversation straight up. All of us are quite familiar with your main research work, and we know that you've worked quite extensively in remote sensing and agriculture, and you've sort of revolutionized the field as well. But before we go further and talk more on that, I would really like to ask you about your initial interest. How did you choose to study plant physiology? Because it's a very specific thing, right? And
plant physiology has the advantage. If you really understand physiology means how living beings function. If you
Right.
study human beings, it includes biochemistry, it includes biophysics, it includes the structure. So basically, it is a very scientific. It's not cataloging like classification, or it is not something very abstract, but it really goes deep into how a cell functions, how a leaf functions, how plants grow. So it goes into the all biochemistry, etc. So incidentally, my interest is in larger things. Biochemistry also is trying to read physics, etc. Also, so it really fits a bill. And some people may go for ecology, but in that era, ecology was not there as part of IRI. It had only biochemistry, plant physiology, genetics, and microbiology. Yeah. Otherwise, all were applied subjects. So within that, I thought, to me, plant physiology is natural choice, because you can appear only one exam. You have to make a choice at that time, at that instant. Okay, what is in your mind? When you are 18, 19, you make a choice. Maybe uninformed or ill-informed, but still you make a choice. Yes.
So like I was saying, I really want to go ahead and ask you a lot of questions about plant physiology. But before we do that, like you mentioned that you were at a point, 19, 20 years old, trying to make a decision, informed or uninformed. But we know that you further moved into the space sector. So at the same time, while you were deciding, coincidentally, it was also the time when the first, close to the time when the first human landed on the moon, and also the time when the Indian space program was quite taking up the shape. Did that have any impact, or did you have an inkling at that point that maybe this was something that you would want to go into further in your life?
No, we are aware and we are reading.
Right.
But then at that stage, you all think this is all engineers' job
Okay.
or something, technologists or engineers. You
Right.
never think that it is closed anywhere within your sort of circle or anything. It is important. You read it in the newspaper, science magazines also. In India, it is still in infancy, and it is abroad somewhere in US. So it is so far removed that you are aware, but it doesn't. You don't spend time on it thinking.
I mean, you had not thought at all that maybe
No, that's
in
why I
future
said
you would
it's so
actually.
far removed. It's a newspaper heading. It will article in a magazine.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you leave through. That's all. Right? It doesn't.
Okay. Okay, so I guess from this point we can go further into the plant physiology bit. Uh, so, like we were talking about, I think after this you ended up going for your PhD as well. So,
Yeah. So
uh-huh.
when I'll explain to you. First, you do masters, which is like uh, 2 years,
Hmm.
and
Right.
I was in a area of which is plant physiology and biochemistry. Basically, if you have a plant and you give it water stress, how does the plant respond? So and plants have two things, because plants must absorb nitrogen from the soil in form of nitrate. So the first reaction which happens is this nitrate is converted into nitrite and then to ammonia before it can go into a protein. That is done by an enzyme called nitrate reductase. So in drought, this nitrate reductase does not function. Secondly, when there is less water, so plants are, they want to save for a rainy day. What they do is there this extra uh, these various chemicals, they convert it into amino acid called proline,
Mm-hmm.
and they accumulate in the cell waiting for the water. So then again from this proline they will make other amino acid and more protein. So
Oh.
my thesis was, uh, take a barley plant, put it in pot, don't give it water, and then do the enzyme assay of nitrate reductase and crush the leaf and find out what is the amount of proline.
Hmm. Okay. That that sounds quite intriguing because I mean, can you also mention what are the tools that are employed to this? But this
So
because
basically,
I
it's a biochemistry work. So
okay.
you take a leaf, you crush it, then you put it in very low temperature. Then what you do is, for proline, you take a something which will dissolve the proline and many other things. Then you take it to a spectrophotometer and use a wavelength, dual wavelength, which will really allow you to, from the absorption band, know what is the concentration. If you know the absorption coefficient, so you should take a measured amount of leaf, dilute it with measured amount of water. As far as the other part is there, you take the tissue, you crush it, you put in a solution, nitrate. Then after 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, see at what rate the nitrate is getting consumed. So that tells you the enzyme activity. So one of them is a accumulating uh, amino acid proline, and the other one is a bioassay. It means the rate of reaction of that is how.
Okay. Sir, also for your PhD work, you worked on wheat modeling, a part of it.
Yeah, yeah. So
So,
yes, uh, I wanted to see how plants behave with the natural environment. So very interesting concept was, we were sowing crops every 15 day. 1st October, 16th October, 1st November, 16th November, 1st December, 16th December, like. Not truly, because that was the plan, but 4 5 days here and there, because you have to indent the labor. eh? It may rain, so finally you will have a different thing. Okay. So, so over 2 years, I almost had 17 wheat sowings. I mean, I have a lot of variables. Then and then we were following the plant. We were following it microscopically, also by dry matter, by leaf area, and literally did very detailed, observation. Observation were all fine, except that, for making the growth curve, wheat grains grow the grain when it is filling.
Okay.
So we will go with test tube, pick three spikes, take the central grain, pluck it and put it immediately in a glass tube, close it and come to lab to weigh it. So you have replicates, you have then every 3 days you really know at what rate dry matter is accumulating in the grain. So basically, if you any living organism, you can break it into two parts. One is inside we have a clock that is called phenology. When does a process start and when it ends? Second, when you are accumulating biomass, there is a growth rate, delta W by delta T. So we exactly measure. But not only that, so I picked up this, then wrote to so many people, in Canada, here, there, and really many people sent lot of printouts of the computer program in Fortran. So in that era, the first computer we used was IBM 1620. It was a big room with flashing light. Even for sine cos tan, you have to add the cards, and it used to be cards which you have to punch. 80 character card IBM, and then for punching machine you can't do in the office, so you have to either go at 7 o'clock in the morning or after 7 p.m, because that whole big room has a lot of typing ladies who are punching cards all day. They are the employees. Students can't enter. Students are permitted morning only.
Okay.
Slowly it went on. Okay. So finally, because of this, I spent 1 year studying, 2 years of observations, and 2 years of statistical analysis. So I wrote a pretty thick thesis
Yeah.
on the phenology, etc. And it had some very interesting results. In fact, when the first wheat crop simulation model was, developed by some other team, they used my thesis data. Till that time, it had the most accurate data of the phenology. So
Oh.
I'm digressing now. So what happens? At 3.5 year, your fellowship stops. Fellowship is for 3 years. You're working at 3.5. So my guide will go on telling, write thesis, write thesis. I said no, till my growth rates are fixed. I will not do till my multivariate regression doesn't come. I won't go. So for that, I used to even go to Delhi University, and for the first time saw IBM 360 by 44.
Oh.
In those days, even to do a multiple regression, it was an effort, but we learned
It
it. Was fine.
it seems quite a challenging thing because I mean even to do the simplest tasks that we find simple today, like managing the computers and all of that, you had to go to a different university and function with that. It just seems quite a lot of effort physically and mentally.
Sir, you were talking about crop modeling, no, sir.
Yes.
So, what are some of the parameters that you vary to see the change in growth of this crop?
What we did was, we looked at the temperature, daily temperature, right? The second was the daily radiation. So really to convert your sunshine hours into megajoules per meter square, that sort of thing, watts per meter square. But it's all those issues were there. And third, we looked at the day length. So the day length basically comes when the sun disk is actually half the its diameter below the horizon, right? And then you really have to, because it is not the length of the day, it is the uh, rate of change of the day length, whether it is increasing or decreasing, that influences the plant development cycle. So literally, we developed equations in terms of how much radiation megajoules absorbed per gram of dry matter produced. It's like efficiency. And the delta DL, positive, negative, vis-a-vis whether the now development will be faster or slower, and then the temperature. So basically, a biological organism has two things. Development, development you talk of reaching various stages, and growth, which is accumulation of dry matter. So by this analysis of natural environment and this type of breakup, we could, for the wheat growth, uh, develop quantitative relations between the phenology, and we actually demonstrated which for the first time, that the wheat, irrespective of the species, etc., when something, some 396 growing degree days accumulate between anthesis, then the grain stops growing. So what will happen if you were to plot the mean temperature on x-axis and the duration of grain growth, right? So this phenology, it will basically steeply fall. So we could get temperatures of from 14 degrees to 27. So we had the duration as long as close to 55 days and as less as 14 days, right? So this is phenology. Secondly, because radiations were also different, the rate per day was different. So you have two curves in a changing environment. You will have the duration and the rate per day, and their product will determine how much yield will come. Yeah, so this brings to very interesting thing where you may not know the early history of India's space application program. So basically, one Professor Pisharotti worked with ICAR to do that coconut wilt. Then Professor Satish Dhawan requested IARI to do some work on agriculture remote sensing. And then at Space Application Center, Dr. Baldev Sahai was there. He came from TIFR. He had a PhD in physics from Chicago, and they did the ARISE experiment, Agriculture Resource Inventory Survey experiment, where with aerial photograph they tried to do crop area, wheat in Patiala and groundnut in Anantapur. And then those people, one of the persons who was also involved, junior at that time, but by the time we came, he was senior, was Jai Singh Parihar, who superannuated as the deputy director of the application area land resources. So it was in that period. So I used to see two, three SAC scientists in the lab in Water Technology Center. They even had put up, so they used to have the temperature gun. They had even put a you know, a microwave radiometer to measure backscatter, etc. But then when you are doing PhD, you see that, but it doesn't register on your mind. You have too many problems of your own. Yeah.
Sir, also to set things in perspective, sir, you have transitioned from purely crop modeling to, let's say, remote sensing based agricultural forecasting or modeling.
So the first issue was, can you identify wheat, discriminate wheat, or map it? So there also there were various suggestions, pressures, and all that. We said we will go to Haryana, Punjab. So myself and Parihar and Kalu Barme, we actually took a jeep from Ahmedabad, traveled 2.5 days. So came to the Central Soil Salinity Research Institute and Punjab Agriculture University. We spoke to their dean research, found collaborators, and we said we will work here. Then we had to order the data and wait for a couple of months. Then the tape will arrive from NRSA. Then you will extract it. Where what is there, you have marked it on the maps. Then you will do, so you will extract statistical pattern and do a pattern recognition.
So this is
But we
when.
were the first one to really do the weed mapping in Karnal district. If you go to the DOS annual report of that era, 1983-84, so our first picture of weed map is as a part of the Department of Space annual report.
Sir, this mapping of wheat or crops was also extended to other crops as well, other
Yeah, yeah. In fact, we did. Then we worked in Katak Puri for rice. Later on, we tried to do groundnut. It was not separable. In fact, we checked that Landsat TM allowed groundnut because the shortwave infrared 1.66 channel is very critical. IRS 1A didn't have 1A and 1B. So then we spoke to Dr. George Joseph, and Shri Kiran Kumar was head of the sensor development division. So in SAG, many meeting, shouting this, that, committees, and with great effort, the SWIR band was introduced. So we provided evidence that this band actually helps in crop discrimination, which are important to us. Later on, we had by that time shown for mustard also, between wheat and mustard separation. See, it's a water absorption band. If you have two crops, one where the leaves have less moisture and other more moist leaf, the mustard leaves are dichotomous and they have more per mass the moisture content. Wheat have more graminaceous leaves, which have the less amount of water per leaf unit area or leaf mass. So satellite really gets the difference. So that water will absorb more and there will be less reflectance. And that is what aids the discrimination.
So before we move further on the details, I would really like to step back a little and understand. Like, there were quite a lot of, I believe, there were Indian these satellites that were studying the crop modeling as well. And can you talk about a little, like, apart from the moisture that you've already mentioned, what are the other aspects when you're looking at a picture, which from a satellite? What are the other aspects that we look at while we're looking at the crop modeling aspect?
Yeah. So see the what is very simple in theory is much more complicated in practice. So first thing what you observe is uh, that to get a better discrimination, you should have a better data. I have already told you you should have better data. It means more channel. Now the problem with optical data is cloud will exactly be there in your study district when the satellite passes. Now, if you have only one satellite which has a 24-day repeativity, if you have a cloud, then the February data will become March, and by March, half the crop may have become yellow and half may be green. Or if you are in January, none of the crop is separable, all are very young plant and same green. So the cloud and proper acquisition became the problem. That is why we had a committee. I was also a member, and there are publications also. We showed that if you have a 50-meter every week, it will sort of give you, even with 50% cloud probability, once in 15 days you will get a picture. So in addition to improving the spatial resolution, the wide field sensor, which first time was 188 and by 1C it was brought to 56. It was through our research we demonstrated to solve the agriculture problem, you should have more repeativity. That is why India developed this unique observation system of LIS 4, LIS 3, and AVIFs. right? So we were literally sort of the agriculture team used to interact very strongly with Dr. George Joseph and Kiran Kumar, and they would really do this identifications, sensor definition, parameterization, saturation radiance, spectral bandwidth, a huge sort of things. While we would do, discrimination, rain-based yield modeling, and all that as one part of the project, but with our colleagues in the space technology, we would really be optimizing and defining the sensor system parameters.
So also, sir, we talked about utilization of this IRS data sets, right? So some problems will also be there with respect to only optical data. Back then,
Yeah.
was there
So
any
rice
usage
rice
of?
was the issue. So that is why once the radar sat came, so our division, a group started working on. So earlier there was a group which used to look SAR only as either geology by taking a photographic picture, or SAR for soil moisture. So that group will go on arguing and fighting with this group which said this SAR, we will do rice, right? So there, the good thing about ISRO system is this research. I mean, within the ISRO is open, presented, reviewed, argued, fought, correct? Every inch. So then there were two entirely divergent views. Somebody telling no, you can't see rice at all. It is a soil moisture. Microwave penetrates vegetation, because they were working on soil moisture for so many years, and they have more publications. So it used to be, but finally our the crop division, the land resources division, really showed and proved that when you fill a field with water, and as the rice emerges, right, it has a unique temporal trajectory of microwave backscatter, volume scattering, that allows you to discriminate and map rice. I mean, this would have taken 6 7 years to prove and convince and do, but yeah. So then the that is why the RISAT 1A became a priority. There were other issues there at that time. People are fighting whether it should be X band SAR or C band. Our aerial was X band. We said X actually is too much, surface scattering. If you have C, which is a combination of volume and scattering, it should really be there. So at the end, that C band should be there. Then for coverage, we would require a scan SAR mode, not the spotlight or that type of mode. Then you start worrying about what should be the incidence angle. You get the point. So
Yes.
for earth observation, you need to optimize on each parameter, and then you should have a valid reason. You should have studies. So this our entire SAC agriculture group was, I would say, very proactive. They really understood what sensors. We were not designing sensors, but we were really evaluating each product and what is useful and to what extent, and what are the reasons, and that sort of
Yes, sir. So, with the set of the satellites and the data we have, sir, with respect to remote sensing in agriculture, what are some of the parameters that we can calculate so that we can predict crop forecast
Yeah,
using
so
the
that
satellites?
that goes to the other part of the story. So by 96, 97, we were doing many things this area, but the yields most of the time were either empirical or they were purely based on weather. So I became head of the crop modeling division in 97 or 98 perhaps. So and then we were 8 9 people. We said we will go the physical way. We will try to get leaf area. I had this entire experience of crop physiology or plant physiology of growth. So I exactly know LAI how to do. I can compute photosynthesis. So literally, Globally, it was being done, but not in India. So we brought in how remote sensing will do a parameter which will grow into a crop simulation model, which will then grow the plant. So now you actually have a plant growing in field. Can you simulate and assimilate the remote sensing data and get capture the parameter of growth, LAI, and diameter and yield by nudging with data into this and then make a forecast. So yeah, so that we introduced that so for 5 6 years we showed many experiment, various type of programming linkage. But in 2004 then I was asked to go to Dehradun. So from agriculture I became total remote sensing, and from core getting this to I became teacher. So I shifted.
So you sort of shifted into an academic setting after this point.
Yeah, but it was training and academy, because mostly it was training. But we had two masters program, uh, which was with the ITC Netherlands on disaster management and geoinformatics, and we then strengthened the MTech program, which was affiliated to Andhra University. That is between 2004 to 10 when I was at IIRS. So there also we strengthened this academic. We renegotiated the international masters, and to do research, we established field observatories, including the very interesting is the eddy flux tower, which basically is a big tower which has a sonic anemometer and an open path CO2 analyzer. It directly measures the carbon dioxide exchange from the forest canopy undisturbed. And ISRO or NRSC or IIRS group, we were operating five in the country, and we have the longest running continuous data. So that is a sub story I didn't touch. So my thesis and my work on wheat and this modeling, uh, the Indian National Science Academy gave me Young Scientist Medal in 1989, right? So our discrimination modeling and my PhD all put together. So very interesting part is uh, you get some 20 30,000 rupees per year to do your research. So we had a director, Pramod Kale, at SAC. I said, sir, uh, I can write something and they will send 30,000. But anyway, we are spending crores. So can I have two students to work? So Shri Pramod Kale uh, was picked up by Vikram Sarabhai. He was also in VSSC initially as the electronics manager. Then he was in US when the INSAT was being built. He was and finally he actually came back once at VSSC as the director VSSC also before. So Pramod Kale is a very very versatile person. So he permitted. So then we talked to the botany department, Professor Vora, and he sent two students who would be paid that fellowship from this money to do their PhD. And why carbon came is very interesting. So when I was in IRI, we had a professor of plant physiology, Professor S.K. Sinha. He was a person of national repute. So he attended the 1980 onwards when this CO2 climate change was there. So with Professor Swaminathan, etc., he attended many important international conferences like Villiers, etc. So once in my visit to IRI, he told me, well, you should work on carbon cycle because it is fundamental for Earth. It's important for climate. Agriculture modifies it, and remote sensing is the tool to study.
Okay, that sort of combines all the technical
Yes,
areas.
so
Which
he says so, but in ISRO it is not like that. Your bread and butter is crop forecasting paid project. So on Saturdays, I used to work exclusively on carbon cycle.
Okay. So, sir, when you talk about working on carbon cycle, what are the technical things that you're looking at?
So first is there was nothing. You don't didn't understand carbon cycle,
Mm-hmm.
so you read. The second thing is paperwork. Can you really put on paper carbon cycle of India? In fact, there were no published work on carbon cycle. Dr. Shailesh Nayak, if you know, he was the left from SAC. He became director in COIS. Then he became the secretary Ministry of Earth Sciences. He was a geologist. The cycle is biogeochemical cycle. So there is a bio and geology. So on Saturdays we would sit together and read and talk to each other. And then we did make one of the earliest paper, which in the entire national scale tries to summarize the number taken from various literature. So, but this was off the issue. Saturday work.
Right.
So Monday to Friday you can't talk morning to evening. That will only be crop forecasting.
Sir, but even when you're talking about carbon cycle, um, how do you map it for an entire nation? I mean, it's not something that's in your hand, right? Like, so what are the techniques that you're using, or on ground,
Yeah.
what is the method?
So basically now anything you want to do, nation or globe. So the first thing is, can you map it,
Right.
right? So map gives you some areas. Then comes that parameter what you have. Can you have classes to incorporate that parameter? You can have forest, crop, wasteland, right?
Hmm.
Then the next question comes, can you really see a biophysical parameter like height of the tree,
Okay.
weight of the wood? Now at this stage it becomes indirect. Then the last stage will be, not last, just before the last, can you map the fluxes? Because these are pools.
Mm-hmm.
So basically it's a bucket. You have found the water in the bucket, but now you have to find at what rate bucket is getting filled and what rate bucket is getting leaking.
Right.
That is the cycle.
Okay.
The cycle is, plants assimilating,
Hmm.
respiring, human beings cutting it, changing it going every day, falling into the soil, respiration coming up, right?
Hmm.
Then climate changing, the rate of photosynthesis, etc. So dry matter accumulation, I knew of the crops, but then I had to study on trees, how the trees behave, how
Right.
do you model it,
Right.
and to have a system with undisturbed measurement is the flux tower. That is what we created. Actually, flux tower is costs about 1-2 crore rupees and it's very difficult. It's far away. You have to manage it.
Hmm.
Logistics are always much more than the. So I was parallelly then doing 2-3 things. We were moving in one track, which is the crop forecasting.
Uh-huh.
Then from the my sort of using the excuse of uh, INSA Young Scientist Medal, I started doing carbon cycle,
Right.
and then I continue to do so. Now I do full time carbon cycle only.
How do you, like you were talking about, there are a lot of effects, like there's a tree which the mass of the tree matters, but how do you put it into calculation when you're making a cycle?
Yeah.
Because
So basically, uh, one way is to put boxes and arrows
okay.
and put aggregate numbers,
Okay.
and you have some sort of upper and lower bounds.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is to convert it into a grid system, and for each one, a separate type of cycling you do. And now, of course, the second one is done. The third one is everything you convert it into a modeling framework, like from plant growth to crop simulation. You really put in a terrestrial carbon model or the entire land surface model, and you run the model where climate, vegetation type, growth, and carbon cycle along with water interact to control each other. the number of parameters goes on increasing, and for all these cycle, the human influence also makes the challenge. So that also, but uh, in IIRS we did very two three very important part. Not only we set up flux tower, so I was made a, project director for National Carbon Project (NCP), and we did countries first independent, uh, total standing carbon in the trees and total carbon in the soil by collecting 2000 samples spread all over India, almost 50-70 collaborators, and use remote sensing to stratify the India. So I mean, we have a lot of publications and lot of citations for that work. If one goes to Google and searches my name, you would really get those papers and citations. In fact, soil organic carbon is almost 2 to 3 times the vegetation, more organic below the soil than actually above the ground.
Sir, actually, so most of us do not understand this term. Can you just explain us what is soil organic carbon and carbon sequestration, and how do you measure it from remote sensing?
So the challenge is very simple. We can start from very simple part. Carbon was formed when the universe was formed, na? Correct? High energy
Yes.
particles have to react, and then the carbon. So carbon has remained the same. Then Earth was formed, right? At that time, it was atmosphere was mostly carbon, like Venus, etc. You really have that. Then some stage between 15 billion to 4 billion years, right? Earth formed, and then after another billion year or so, something photosynthesis happened. So living organism came. So you had very high carbon dioxide. But then slowly these people started making it into organic matter. So you have a geological carbon which is in the rock, lot of carbon which was fixed, which will go in the ocean and get into compact and become coal and petroleum, right? So slowly, but there would be a glacial and interglacial, either controlled by orbit of the Earth or various other processes. So you'll get ice age and mini ice age. So finally, what happened? By you had in the air around 290 parts per million carbon dioxide, and only it was the Svante Arrhenius who showed that it is the CO2 and water vapor which absorb this infrared radiation, not while coming, while going out, and they trap this heat. That is why the Earth survives. If there was too much CO2, will be too hot, and if it was not there, we would really be freezing cold, right? So then by early 50s, what was known was from 1860, your burning of coal in the industrial revolution. So there were a lot of debates that carbon dioxide is increasing. By 1870, it was proven by measuring the carbon dioxide in Hawaii island Mauna Loa, which is a volcanic island, that CO2 is really rising almost like 1 part of ppm per year or so. Then the climatology, numerical weather prediction people showed what it would mean. So by 1880, we really knew that this carbon dioxide increase is very dangerous. Then again, we created a what's called United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. Then the global politics started. Some people will say it is the deforestation which is causing. Somebody will say this. Ocean people say ocean will absorb, don't worry. Somebody will say aerosols are increasing, they will cool the atmosphere. So last 30 years, this tamasha is going on, right? But the crux of the matter is across the year, as forests disappear or are planted, CO2 you have different vegetation time. You have yearly fluctuation in rainfall temperature. How much plants are absorbing and how much is coming out. is not properly quantified. So you need to add more observations and approach it from four different sides. One is the observation side, second is the inventory side, third is the modeling side, and the fourth side is, if all things you are getting correct, then if I measure by satellite the columnar CO2, right? I measure columnar CO2. I have a land model. I have an ocean climate driven model. I know anthropogenic, how much petrol is being burnt and where are the factories. So I could invert by pure transport of CO2. Nothing happens to CO2 in the air. You can measure it or you can transport it, which is equivalent to wind transport. So I should be able to invert the columnar CO2 abundance into this net source sink rate. And this net source sink rate must be then compatible of our ground based, bottom up inventory. So you have top down whole atmosphere monitoring by satellite, and you know from the ground and mapping that this thing is happening. Now the two, are they compatible or incompatible? That is the proof, because you can't really measure. You approach a problem from two different perspective and make a hypothesis and prove that this really is more hypothesis is accepted. And if there are some technical uh, assumptions or things which do not match, somebody will point out, then you can devise another experiment to address them. So it is a function of inventory and going up. Observation, how much CO2 is there anyway now, many places, and the satellite retrieval of dynamics of globally, where and how much and how it see, it's a continuously changing system, and which is a advection, convection, horizontal transport, emission, uptake, is such a dynamic system that without satellite, without retrieval, and without both the approaches, inversion as well as positive modeling, you can't say that you have understood. Because what is the purpose of all this, Allah? That what would be the CO2 in 2050?
Hmm.
So science starts with observation, hypothesis, model, and goes to prediction.
Yeah.
But the problem with this prediction is, this prediction involves oceanography, it involves atmosphere transport, it involves forest, it involves socio-economic, whether it involves fossil fuel.
Hmm.
So it actually involves economy, it involves large number of discipline to say what trajectory the earth is taking. That is why it is so fascinating and complicated.
Very interesting, sir. So, actually, in the past few decades or years, we have established that amount of greenhouse gases or global warming exists. Sir, whether this will affect somehow the crop yield also in any way?
So yeah, so basically now there are three issues. One, more CO2 means more, you can have higher photosynthesis. But this simplistic view doesn't hold, because to do more photosynthesis, you have more nitrogen also to be absorbed. No? So at that stage, crop will become nitrogen limited and more photosynthesis will not take place. The second one is, this also means warming. Warming means plants will develop faster, so growth duration may be less, or the more respiration may happen at night. So your net accumulation of carbon in the grain can go low. Then you have third problem, that this alters the rainfall pattern. Some areas may have more drought, some areas may have more flood, some areas may have better growth. So how spatially this will pan out? So that simple question of what will happen, uh, to be understood, each of the separate parameter has to have predictive power. That is why so what you do is you take previous history by taking a model, and then make a longer predictive model and see how you can better back project the past. and future you convert it into scenarios. That's how.
Sir, like you mentioned that while studying the whole system, it's quite essential to understand how the oceans work or how the terrains are working, how the trees are functioning. So, and the major technique that is used is of remote sensing. So, what are the difference in the methods of remote sensing while we're looking at a terrain or while we're looking at an ocean region? Because of course there must be some barrier issue which arises due to the ocean.
So ocean is you basically look at the sea surface temperature.
Right.
You look at ocean chlorophyll.
Okay. Mhm.
You convert it into columnar photosynthesis. You also look at the wind, etc., which change the flux between air and ocean. But lot of ocean carbon cycle uh, is hidden because it is in below the visibility.
Right.
Ocean are the largest, almost 80-90% of the global short-term carbon cycle is in the ocean. But all this happens deep in the ocean. But their flux rates are smaller. So you need to do their remote sensing comes in a very interesting. There are Argo floats, and there are other uh, instruments. So they measure a lot of ocean parameter. They go on drifting, and there are those which go into the ocean and then they come out. So when they come out, they burst the sample data and send it to the satellite. So the satellite communication gets used for data collection. You shouldn't use it only as a remote sensing.
Uh-huh.
In fact, oceans are so diverse. Argo floats, how will they communicate? How will you get in real time data? So Argo actually is a you link it to a DCP satellite. It basically whatever wind etc. it is measuring, it transmits to the space, and the satellites pick the signal and bring.
Mhm. And sir, what about glaciers also, Lucas?
Yeah, so glaciers have the next issue. You So there is a thermal thing which is coming up from below. It has a melt. Uh, at the edge, you can have carving of glacier, and it can be in the water. So you have various forms of fixed ice, uh, icebergs, seasonal snow ice. So satellite will detect it. So at poles, you have a lot of ice.
Right. Right.
So up to now, we were simply mapping this area. But now what we can do is we have lidar, right? So whether the thickness of the ice has increased, then we have other data where we can distinguish between frozen and molten snow, old and fresh. In summer, there is a melting, right? So what is the extent of melting? Third, now what happens at the edge of the continent? This uh, ice breaks into an iceberg. So basically, as far as this cryosphere is concerned, uh, there are a large number of parameters which can be done by satellite remote sensing. You always would require field data, no doubt, but this spatial and continuous monitoring of continental scale type of things, processes, and then interrelationships can only be done by remote. So that's why the Earth observation is very important part of the current all this research on Earth system science. Very large number of disciplines.
Mhm. Right, makes sense. Uh, so now, sir, I guess I mean I think we can move a bit further into the application ends of all the science that we've talked about today. Uh, One thing I really wanted to ask, because agriculture is part of a civilization as a whole, for sure. Um, with all the research that happens in the scientific community, uh, do you think that there is a direct link between policy making and the research work that is happening? And if yes, what is to what extent is it being used?
Yeah. So what happens? The answer is yes.
Okay.
correct?
Hmm.
There is, but now, uh, whether it is at that scale and speed is the one where later people start, agreeing or disagreeing. Because the point is transforming societies. Uh, there are a large number of other factors which come into play: socio-economic, education, delivery systems, many things. Scientists are still a homogeneous lot, and they can say it should be done like that. But a poor person who has to work in the sun, and then he is not sure whether he will be able to have enough money and grain for next 6 months, right? And maybe he's indebted, whether land is his own or is somebody. So this socio-economic education and these things, they start playing, they determine much more strongly. So these factors become dominate our pure science and pure policy making. Yeah. So basically, I mean, we think it is linear, na? Science, outcome, policy, and society benefits. No, it doesn't. So straight and so linear way it doesn't happen. There are too many other factors. See, without understanding these socio-economic conditions, even sociology, there is a lot of politics also is there.
Right, yeah.
And there is always difference between haves and have nots. It comes as north south, it comes as this and that. Then in the village also it comes with people who sort of control more. Then in the village also there will be a disadvantage. So this is a issue which is,
But sir, do you think that we've been able to reach out to the basic human, like the science community, especially in the field of agriculture, because that's like
yeah. See, the point is they do, but they also recognize whenever there is a new technology, there is a early adopters.
right, yeah.
And then also the technology access sometimes require money. I mean, suppose they have built a new machine, obviously people with that will come. Then whether in the village there is a system to sort of service that machine and do sale, industry comes in, because scientists don't go to villager. Whether it is seed, pesticide, tractor sale or whatever, it is the salesperson and that industry which basically determines. Now industries also are now more, they now understand and appreciate. Those are in the agri business. So we have a very simplistic notion which actually,
Sir, what are some of the applications other than agriculture which are very impactful that we can use remote sensing data and derive?
so one thing which we learned at NRSC is the disaster information for disaster management. So there can be nothing more important. Like, once you have cyclone, use the satellite data and then you predict before 5 days at what time and what speed it is going to hit where. Then on the ground, having, the socials and the administrative system to shift that people out. Just imagine, 20, 30 years ago, every cyclone means, 1,000 to 10,000 people die.
Mm.
Now that numbers are 4, 8, 10. That too because of the rain at some place, right? Now flood we forecast, but flood is such a phenomena people don't easily migrate. So and in case of drought, we use remote sensing more to pay compensation rather than work. But on a bigger set, I will say, uh, disaster management, information support, relief, rehabilitation, prevention, preparedness, this entire gamut of using it for the benefit. And mind you, the people affected are the poorest, right? So, and the information is being done by satellite, etc., so that they can tell the agencies, please go there, there somebody is there. Then there are other applications now which are more towards this infrastructure and commerce and that related, which make more money, but Then there would be things now which will slowly come. They are related to sustainability, monitoring and verification of sustainable development goals, watershed conservation, soil erosion control.
Sir, given that we're also looking at disaster management, has there also been efforts put into using remote sensing for city planning while building a?
Yeah. In fact, city planning, a lot of things. So, city planning, what happens? It is done at three different places. There
Mhm.
is a master plan. Then there are TP schemes, and then there are actual layout, etc. So, at master plan scale, remote sensing is very useful because you see the connectedness. But when you come to individual section or block at the TP level, there you need centimeter scale. So there drones or ground survey and GPS becomes very important. But GPS itself is a space technology, right? Because their precise location becomes.
Sir, also, when we talk about disasters, right, sir, these days there's lots of landslides at hilly terrains and a lot of people are affected. As we predict floods using remote sensing, can we also do landslides?
No, what landslide? Okay, I'll tell you the very because IIRS was also involved and NRSC has also done extensive. So the landslide, the first thing was people were mapping the landslide. Then later on, what we could do is we could create a landslide hazard zone atlases. Basically, a set of conditions of slope, rock type, dip, many other factor, vegetation. They make only certain spots more landslide hazard. They exist and you need to revise. Then at the third stage, what happens? For prediction, can you really merge the real time rainfall where flagging red zones that here these be careful, site of warning. And at fourth stage, what happens? Now, these days, you have satellite data that you can almost daily capture some areas. So, after all, a landslide is nothing but a sliding or mass movement. So if you can really get a picture daily or sub daily, and if there are known markers, you can find out the flow rates. Now, for many people, including with SAR data, etc., you can find at what rate some or differential rate at which Earth is moving or sliding, right? Because you don't go from good place to a landslide place. So pore pressure builds up. There is a slope instability. Then at some places, soil sort of gives way. Then there is a small movement. It has more load and bigger movement, and then you have landslide. And sometimes what happens? Heavy rain or earthquake. So even recovering landslides, it re-triggers. So now there is a very good understanding. A lot of things we do, but you can't really convert it into every landslide, every point, every day predict. You get the point. But we know much more, and we have many tools. But whether they are at a stage that pan India, pan every landslide, you can go on warning. Maybe it will take some time.
Sir, you just mentioned about differential movement of land, right? So, sir, is there any possibility that we can also do seismic plate movement?
Seismic, anyway, we are doing. See, the whole point is the geodesy and other community, they were already first doing what is called very long baseline interferometry, VLBI. So you have, a ground station 2000 kilometer away, and you basically measure a satellite or something which is at a say one constant point. The two actually start giving you different numbers. You can find out. Then you have what are called cores, which is continuously operating receiving station of GPS. So from the cores, from the same satellite, you can really find out. So in India also many cores are there. So you can say the Indian plate is moving 3 millimeter in this direction every year or something. So the literature on plate tectonic through GPS, CORS, VLBI is huge actually, hundreds of papers, including by Indian authors. And we also, I think, did NRSC also did a couple of work.
Yes, I think we've taken up quite a lot of your time, so we'll just conclude with last one or two questions, if that's okay. I mean, we've talked about agriculture and all the remote sensing areas, but can you tell us right now what is the upcoming trends or advances that we're expecting in the field of remote sensing and in terms of agriculture and other areas?
So, what is happening? If you look at remote sensing, this philosophy of remote sensing is changing. One is now there are more business and commercial applications. Your friend Satshare is a one example, right? The second point is your other friends are there. Now, governments have made satellite data free. Entire Sentinel and European Commission data is free. So is the Landsat. Only high resolution private companies will make. So maybe we have woken up to it now. Maybe there would be Indian companies. Pixel is anyway would have sent perhaps the Anand, that hyperspectral. Today, PSLV launch was there. So now three things are happening. The commercial remote sensing will be with private people who would really drive what type of application. A traditional medium scale national global mapping data are all free. So much data is there, nobody is able to analyze. So the downstream industry of generating customized products and services is the largest opening available for people with analytical remote sensing, earth observation, or pure data analysis sort of. But new categories of observing earth, whether it is in terahertz, whether it is hyperspectral, whether CubeSats having measuring even at 50 meter the emission of methane, etc., like GHG sat, which is a commercial product. Slowly the private sector will also move into from space weather and climate data collection, which up to now has been only in space, right? So there are more downstream data and services and that type of opportunities than ever before.
This was a conversation from the 4th season of Zeroing In, the Science Podcast, where we're exploring the foundations of how cities were found, formed, and developed over the centuries. We extend our sincerest gratitude to Professor V.K. Dadhwal for this intriguing discussion and taking us on this amusing journey of understanding the food in our plate and how a nation keeps its population fed. On behalf of the Zeroing In team for this episode, which included Radhakrishna Kavaluru, along with the seasoned team of Zeroing In, and I am Shreya Mishra. Thanks a lot for listening to this episode. We'll be back with a new episode next week with further interesting questions and conversations with eminent Indian scientists from across the world. If you have any suggestions, you can visit us on zeroingin.org or write to us on zeroinginpodcast@gmail.com. And follow us on our Instagram or Facebook handles @zeroinginpodcast for the latest updates. Until next time.